We have a dual phaser, two phasers in the system. And if you do this, in general, the effect is relatively mild. So I take, for instance, a sawtooth output. I put it into the input of a phaser. And I take the output of the phaser. I have a knob here, and this knob defines whether I go to a certain mode of phasing, and you can hear a change in timbre, but then when I start to move this knob, you hear that it will now sort of act a bit like a bandpass filter. I can also move it in another direction, which basically means whether I mix the input signal itself in phase or in antiphase with the output of the chain of all-pass poles, and then you will get a more traditional kind of phaser effect. So if we modulate this with a slow triangle wave, you hear that we get this sort of traditional soft and mellow kind of phaser effect. And if I turn this knob to the other direction, it's more like a bandpass filter here. Losing the high, because in this case it is the high that will be in antiphase with the input. In the other case, so both the high and the low will be in antiphase with the input. In the other case, the high and the low will be in phase with the input. The interesting thing about this is that we can actually add some feedback to this, and then the sound will become more pronounced. You can even at the resonance that is so high that it is almost starting to oscillate, in which case you have to turn it a bit back. We can actually speed this modulation up. And then you hear that we add a lot of effect to the sound. Here we also have the original sound present. Here the original sound has sort of disappeared. We can, these phases have 8 poles in series, so that's quite a lot. And if we have a little switch here, where we can change the way how we modulate these poles. In this mode, actually all the poles are swept up or down. But if I flip this switch to the down position, half of the poles sweep up, while half of the poles sweep down, and you get a more talkative kind of effect. There's also a position where basically we keep 4 poles stable and 4 poles are only sweeping, which gives a somewhat milder effect than the... So we have 3 different modulation modes, and you can choose the one that you like. What's actually a bit more interesting about phasers is that these phasers, when in resonant mode, they actually, because there are 8 poles, And because if you make an all-pass filter from one single 6 dB low-pass filter that gives a 45-degree phase shift, then the all-pass filter will actually give you a 90-degree phase shift. So that means if you have two poles, they will produce a 180-degree phase shift, which will produce one resonant peak. So if you have 8 poles, you will actually create 4 resonant peaks. It's a bit difficult to understand this, but you sort of have to understand that each pole, one pole does something above that peak and the other something below that peak. So if you put it in resonance mode like this and you reduce the pitch that comes in, then you hear that you can make nice percussive effects. Even modulate these effects a bit, or spread the resonant peaks. And I like this effect very much when you use this from the Wrangler, because for the Wrangler I can, for instance, use the pulse output of the clocking oscillator, feed that into an envelope generator, set the second envelope, the attack decay envelope, which I have to talk about, the envelope generators, to really short, and then instead of feeding it this sawtooth, I feed it the output of this envelope generator. But then I also take this stepped signal that changes on everything and use that to modulate the and in that case you can create interesting kind of timbres. And because everything in this system can be modulated at audio rate, you can even do some interesting tricks by taking a sine wave signal, add that to the 1-volt octave input of the phaser, and slightly open and I think, oh, that's quite fun. Why not use this step modulation signal, feed it into the matrix, so I can feed it into the modulation of the dual phaser and feed it also to the modulation of this oscillator. And you see that I only need a very little bit of sine wave modulation to and because I'm now triggering this envelope generator, I can also use that envelope to modulate the output of the oscillator. Give it a Okay. So phasers can also be used many times as quite interesting percussive sound generators by pinging the phasers. And because you have two phasers, you can actually make two percussive sounds with different rhythms and polyrhythmic stuff and that kind of thing to make it musically interesting.
Are both phasers identical, Rob?
Yeah, they're identical. You can actually also use them together to get a even more strong phasing effect, longer phaser, and it would be a 16-pole phaser. But in general, myself, I almost always use it for percussive effects, to tell you the truth. And so one of the other things is, for instance, if you have like a drum computer that is mostly quite static in the timbres that it produces, constantly repeating the same, then one of the things that you can do is you can feed it to the dual phaser and then use either the wrangler clocked by the same drum computer or a sample and hold clocked by the drum computer, so that in every beat you get a different control voltage, to slightly change the settings of the phaser, and that will really do quite nice things to your otherwise quite static drum computer.